The last of the guests trickled out as twilight stretched its fingers over the garden. I stood alone on the edge of the old flagstone path, the soft hum of cicadas replacing the muffled pleasantries that had filled the estate all afternoon. The Carter house, my grandparents' legacy, looked both familiar and foreign now. The windows flickered warm with interior light, but inside was not warmth. Inside, there was ceremony. Polished shoes, folded hands, sympathetic nods, 1,000 rehearsed gestures. I hadn't returned to Savannah for holidays or family functions in years. I came back now only for them. For Margaret and Samuel Carter, the only people who ever looked me in the eyes and truly saw me. Even as the crowd in black mingled, trading eulogies like business cards, I stood apart, not excluded, not exactly, just transparent. The chairs at the funeral were arranged in rows of importance. Imogen, naturally, sat front and center. Roxalana and Alifair flanked her like statues carved for show, elegant and immovable. I was placed near the aisle, one row back, next to a cousin I hadn't seen since high school. No one spoke to me unless prompted. No one asked how I'd been. The air between me and the rest of them felt glassy, fragile, sharp. It didn't surprise me. In our family, appearances mattered. Grief, if it had to be expressed, was best done quietly, ideally with perfect posture and matching black. Love was implied, not demonstrated. But my grandparents had been different. They taught me not to equate silence with absence. They had always been there, in presence, in principle, in small, consistent ways that anchored me through the chaos of being their overlooked granddaughter. Now, they were gone. And I was back in a house that never felt mine, surrounded by people who only remembered I existed when it benefited them. I straightened my blazer as the family lawyer, Izana, called everyone to the library. Time to see what the dead had left behind. The Carter Estate Library had always reminded me of a courtroom. Mahogany shelves, heavy curtains, a long table too polished for comfort. Everyone took their seats with the kind of tension that usually precedes a verdict. Roxalana leaned back, arms crossed. Alifair stared into her lap. Imogen smiled, faint and knowing, like she'd already counted every dollar in her head. I sat quietly, 2 seats down from the end, hands folded, heart thudding like it had its own agenda. Izana began with the formalities. Executor statements, validation of documents, legal clarity. My eyes glazed for a moment, until she paused, glanced down, and said, "And now the distribution of assets." She looked straight at me. "We leave our full estate, totaling $56 million in assets, to our granddaughter Sophrona." Silence is never truly silent. It shifts, crackles. In that room, it roared. Alifair's gasp sounded theatrical, too crisp to be spontaneous. Roxalana's face twisted as though someone had just slapped her with a truth she couldn't unsee. Imogen's wineglass tipped, crashed to the carpet in pieces. No one moved. I didn't breathe. Me? I hadn't asked for anything. I'd barely spoken to Izana except to confirm I'd attend. My grandparents hadn't mentioned money in years. I figured it would all go to Imogen. Of course it would. She was the face, the golden child, the well-groomed heir. So why me? I didn't speak. I didn't flinch. I remembered Grandpa's words, whispered on a back porch long ago. Stillness isn't weakness. It's power waiting for its moment. So I waited. Later, in the reception hall, people swarmed around Imogen like she was the grieving widow instead of the passed-over daughter. They whispered, touched her arm, tilted their heads in false concern. I stood near the buffet, untouched glass of champagne in hand, watching the show. Roxalana's voice, loud enough for the nearby circle to hear, floated over the room. "Some of us are here because we belonged. Some are just here for the food." I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. The words weren't a shock. They were consistent, predictable. Her cruelty was always cloaked in southern grace, wrapped in sugar and salt. Still, it landed, harder than I'd like to admit. I walked to the far end of the room near the terrace, needing a moment to breathe. Imogen followed. "You know they only gave it to you because they felt sorry for you," she said. I turned slowly, met her eyes. Funny. I never saw pity in their eyes, Only pride. Her mouth twitched, but she said nothing else. And that was the real wound, wasn't it? Not that I'd inherited the money, but that I'd inherited their trust. That I'd been seen, chosen, while they, who had measured their worth by proximity and polish, were left with nothing more than illusions. I didn't feel victorious. I felt stripped, not rich, not powerful, just aware of every eye that avoided mine, of every conversation I wasn't welcome in, of every picture in the hallway that held everyone but me. I returned to the hotel late, the weight of the day pressing into my shoulders like an old coat I'd forgotten how to wear. I dropped my shoes by the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened the folder Isana had handed me after the reading. Inside, handwritten notes from Grandma, old recipes, a list of books she thought I should read. A small envelope with Grandpa's handwriting. For when they forget what you've done. I ran my fingers over the paper. Not crying, just remembering. In a notebook I'd brought, I started to write. Not to make sense of it, but to record what they'd left behind. They didn't just leave me money, they left me their judgment, and everyone else left me alone. The house looked different at night. The same mansion where I'd spent holidays pretending to be invisible now loomed like a courthouse, grand and cold. When I pulled into the circular driveway, the porch lights were already on, as if they'd been expecting me long before the message arrived. The text came hours after the will reading. Come by tonight. We need to talk. 8 p.m. No name, no greeting, just a summons from a family that never used to ask, only instruct. I stepped inside, and the air was heavy with cologne, polished wood, and the kind of silence that preceded something staged. The living room, what they like to call the formal parlor, was dim except for the amber light spilling from a single chandelier. Roxolana stood near the fireplace, one hand gripping a tumbler. Alifair sat on the edge of the couch, legs crossed, her phone glowing dimly in her lap. And Imogen was seated in the center chair like a monarch on borrowed time. Thanks for coming, Roxolana said without looking at me. No one else spoke. I didn't sit. This about the will? Alifair looked up, offered a tight smile. It's about clarity, sweetheart. From a side table, Roxolana picked up a thick envelope and walked toward me. She held it out the way someone might hold a contract to a client who should have known better than to expect negotiation. We've had some time to process, she said, and we feel it's in everyone's best interest for you to transfer the estate back to Imogen. I didn't take the envelope. Is that what you feel or what you decided before the reading? Don't get defensive, Imogen interjected, her tone soft, practiced. This doesn't have to be ugly. It's already insulting, I replied, quieter than I meant, but firm. Roxolana's voice dropped. Let's not pretend this is a role you were ever meant to fill. I glanced around the room, each of them so sure, so composed. My hands didn't shake, but my stomach tightened. I remembered Grandma's words. If you hesitate, they'll rewrite your life. I opened the envelope. It was a full asset transfer agreement. Legal, notarized, dated before the funeral. They'd prepared this before they even knew the outcome. You came ready to erase me, I said. No, Alifair responded gently. We came ready to protect you, from yourself. And from success, I added. Roxolana pointed at the page. Imogen understands this world. She's been preparing for it. I stared at the pen laid across the top of the documents. It was gold, engraved with my grandfather's initials, one I remembered him using at the kitchen counter to balance checkbooks, never to sign away people's futures. I picked it up, held it between two fingers, and set it back down. I'm not signing, I said. Imogen shifted in her seat, as if physically offended by the refusal. Then don't say we didn't offer you a lifeline. I nodded once. Consider me swimming just fine. That ended the conversation. And I drove back to my temporary rental, the night sky a dark mirror I didn't want to look into. My hands rested on the steering wheel long after I'd parked. I stared at the quiet street, the glow of porch lights from unfamiliar neighbors. Somewhere, kids were playing a game past curfew. I envied their certainty. Inside, I dropped my keys on the counter and checked my phone. A new notification from the bank app. Account frozen. At first, I thought it was a glitch. I tried again. Same message. I clicked deeper. Pending legal review. A note at the bottom. Requested by co-signer, Imogen Carter. I blinked. Co-signer? I hadn't realized she was listed on the trust fund Grandpa opened for me in college. I'd never used it much, but it was supposed to be mine, untouched unless in emergencies. Apparently, this qualified as one. I called the bank. The voice on the other end was polite but firm. Yes, ma'am. The co-signer has issued a block due to an internal dispute within the Carter estate. And what if the co-signer is the one creating the dispute? I'm sorry, Ms. Carter. Until legal status is resolved, we cannot lift the hold. I hung up and stared at the ceiling. Not angry, not surprised, just calculating. So this wasn't personal anymore. This was method, tactics. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were trying to starve me into submission. They think I'll cave when I can't pay for gas, I whispered aloud. They don't realize I've lived off ramen and resilience longer than they've lived off dividends. I pulled out a legal pad and wrote in all caps, if they push, I push back. Under it, I began to list every document, date, conversation. I titled the folder, Countermeasure. They wanted war. Fine, but I wouldn't play it on their battlefield. By the time the sun crept in through the blinds, I'd cataloged every bank statement, text, and voice memo since the funeral. My hands ached from typing. My mind didn't. I didn't sleep. I brewed coffee. Sat at the edge of the sofa, legs crossed, hands still, waiting. Later that morning, I opened my journal and wrote, I didn't ask for a war, but I won't walk into the fire without water in hand. Then I called Izana. When she answered, her voice was quiet, guarded. Sophrona? I think I need to understand what happens when a family tries to rewrite legal documents with sentiment. There was a pause, then a sigh. Meet me this afternoon, discreetly. As I ended the call, I looked out the window again. A bird landed on the sill and took off before its claws settled. Fast, calculated, unhesitant. I didn't envy its wings. I envied its certainty. Sleep never came. My body was still, but my mind paced, over, under, through the chaos of yesterday. I sat on the floor by the coffee table, legal documents scattered around me like a deck of badly shuffled cards. Some pages were folded, others marked with yellow tabs or scribbled notes in my grandmother's cursive. Between them sat my laptop, its screen glowing dimly, cursor blinking on an empty spreadsheet I couldn't bring myself to fill. Somewhere around 5 o'clock a.m., I brewed coffee, left it untouched. Instead, I slid back into the chair and opened a folder labeled Trust Activity, Discretionary. It sounded innocuous. Buried deep in the itemized listings, one line stopped me cold. $320,000. Private equity allocation. Imogen Carter. Status. Outstanding. The notation was vague, but not vague enough. I clicked through previous years and saw nothing similar under my name. No distributions, no favors, nothing. That's when it hit me. 2 years ago, Imogen had invited the whole family to a dinner, hosted at a trendy rooftop restaurant she barely let me sit at. She'd gone on and on about an eco-resort project in Arizona, claimed it would revolutionize luxury travel. Everyone smiled, nodded. I remembered the way Roxalana beamed with pride, as if Imogen's ambitions were an extension of her own resume. That project had failed, quietly but completely. There was never another mention of it. Until now. My hands hovered over the keyboard. A soft ache grew in my chest, not from betrayal, not from anger, but from recognition. My grandparents knew. They knew she defaulted, and they didn't say anything. They just recalculated. I needed more than spreadsheets. I turned to the last box I hadn't opened yet, still taped shut at the bottom of the closet. It was marked in fading ink. Private, MS. Inside, among aged newspaper clippings and brittle manila folders, was a small black leather ledger. No embellishment, no lock, just a ribbon marker peeking out from the middle. I opened it and immediately recognized the handwriting. My grandfather's. Every page was neat, purposeful, dates on the left margin, descriptions beside them. It wasn't a financial ledger in the traditional sense. It was a record of trust, a scorecard of choices. One entry read, Imogen, loan approved despite concern. No repayment, no apology, no acknowledgement. Another, just below it. Sophrona, declined bonus offer, citing need to remain independent. Brings groceries for Margaret without prompting. There were dozens like that. Notes about birthdays remembered, calls returned, words spoken and withheld. It wasn't just money. It was legacy measured in choices, not charm. I closed the book and rested it on my lap, hands clenched around it like it might vanish if I let go. My eyes stung, but I didn't cry. I felt something older than grief, deeper than pride. They had seen me. I got dressed, slipped the ledger into my bag, and decided to walk. I didn't know where I was going until I ended up standing in front of their old house. The porch hadn't changed. The paint was peeling a bit, but the rocking chairs still faced east toward the morning sun. I stood there, rooted, until I heard a small voice behind me. "You're the lady who got the big house money, huh?" I turned. A girl, maybe 7, holding a piece of sidewalk chalk in one hand and a juice box in the other. "I guess that's me," I said, offering a smile. She nodded. "I'm Maddie. I live next door." "Nice to meet you, Maddie." She pointed toward the porch. "Your grandma used to sit right there. She said you were the brave one." I blinked. "She said that?" Maddie shrugged, nonchalant in the way only children can be. "Yeah, she said you didn't need anyone to clap when you walked in. She said you already knew who you were." My throat tightened. "She used to wave at me every morning," Maddie added, returning to her chalk. "I miss her." "Me too," I whispered. I stayed a while longer, just watching the house. At one point, Maddie drew a sun with a smiling face. It looked lopsided and perfect. Eventually, I made my way back to the rental. The walk gave me time to catalog what mattered. I wasn't angry anymore, not the way they wanted me to be. Anger could be dismissed. Documented proof could not. At the kitchen table, I laid out the ledger beside my laptop. I began photographing each page, scanning every note. I opened a new folder, Character over Inheritance. I wanted the name to remind me what this was about, not revenge, not retribution, just proof. After compiling everything, I drafted a private memo to myself. It read, "They buried the truth in numbers. I'll resurrect it with facts." I saved it. Then I called Isana. "We need to meet," I said. "Name the place." "Somewhere neutral," I replied. "And soon." As I ended the call, I looked back down at the black ledger, its spine resting against the glow of my laptop. It wasn't just a book. It was a mirror. The coffee shop sat on the corner of Whitaker and Jones, a place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. No frills, no curated Instagram shelves, just the soft hiss of espresso machines, the clink of ceramic mugs, and the low murmur of conversations that knew how to keep their distance. I arrived 10 minutes early. I needed the quiet. I needed to see if Isana would come alone. She walked in at 10:03. Her coat was still buttoned, even though the morning was warming fast, and she clutched her briefcase like it might float away if she didn't. We found a table near the window. I offered a polite nod. She didn't smile. "Something's happened," I said without prompting. Isana hesitated, then pulled out a folded sheet of paper from her bag and placed it between us. "Our firm received a request yesterday. Someone wants a certified copy of the previous version of your grandparents' will." I blinked. "Previous version?" She gave a slow, almost apologetic nod. "The one that listed Imogen as sole heir." Of course it had. "And?" I leaned in slightly. "We're required to notify you. Since the current will supersedes it, there's no legal issue, but the request came through informal channels, pressured, and fast." I kept my voice even. "Who sent it?" She avoided my eyes. "I'm not at liberty to disclose that." "Come on, Isana, was it Imogen?" "I can't say." "Roxolana, then?" Silence. I sat back. "You know what I find fascinating? People never bother to hide what they don't think you're capable of confronting." She finally looked at me. "Sophrona, I believe your grandparents were clear in their final wishes. But you need to understand, this isn't about fairness. It's about preservation. Some people will stop at nothing to keep the version of the story that suits them. And some of us, I said, were raised to live with the truth even when it made us inconvenient. She nodded once, then stood. I'll send you the official record of the request. After she left, I sat for a while, watching the condensation slide down the side of my cup. Outside, Imogen's world was likely spinning on, meetings, brunches, branding projects where she smiled for cameras while slicing the truth behind closed doors. By the time I returned to the rental, the sun had shifted above the rooftops, casting narrow bands of gold through the blinds. I set my bag down, walked straight to the pile of documents on the kitchen table, and pulled everything back out. Halfway through sorting the papers, I found it. A manila envelope I hadn't opened. No label, just my name on the flap, written in my grandfather's steady script. Inside, a notarized letter. I sat down slowly, unfolded it, and read. The handwriting was precise. The date on top, 6 months before their passing. The opening line knocked the breath from my chest. To our granddaughter Sophrona, who knows what it means to earn without asking. The letter went on to explain the reasons for the change in the will, their disappointment in how Imogen had handled financial obligations, their desire for the family name to be preserved by someone who valued integrity over image. Attached were evaluations of their mental clarity, signed by physicians, witness signatures. The paper trail was airtight. Then came the final sentence. If you're reading this, it means they're trying to undo our decision. Stand firm. I folded the letter back up, tucked it into the envelope, and placed it inside the black ledger. My chest swelled, not with pride, but with pressure. They'd trusted me to be ready. They'd trusted I wouldn't fold when the theater started. I was still holding the ledger when my phone rang. No caller ID. I answered. Hello? A woman's voice, crisp, no warmth. Ms. Carter, I'm calling from the Family Resolution Bureau, a third-party mediation service. I didn't respond. We've been contacted by members of your extended family. It's our role to facilitate dialogue during inheritance misunderstandings. Still silent. Ms. Carter, these situations can escalate quickly. Public image is a fragile thing, especially when media becomes involved. There it was. She paused, then continued. We advise resolving this quietly. A voluntary transfer of control, perhaps in exchange for advisory status or a stipend. Everyone walks away with dignity. Who hired you? I'm not authorized to disclose that. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. You're not mediation. You're a mouthpiece. Ms. Carter, it would be wise to consider the long-term consequences of fighting your family. I pressed the speaker button, opened my voice recorder app, and set it beside me on the table. I'm sure you'll do what's best, she said. We'll be in touch. The call ended. I saved the file, named it Veiled Threats, 10:42 p.m. I didn't pace. I didn't rant. I opened my laptop and created a timeline, will drafts, bank freeze, legal intimidation, media manipulation, now hired resolution firms. They were methodical. I had to be more so. I wrote across the top of the file, Evidence Archive, Phase 1. Then I scribbled a note beneath it. They're playing the long game. I'll build the evidence trail that buries them. The message came through at 6:12 p.m. No hi, no how are you? Just 5 words. Be here at 8. We're settling this. Roxalana never wasted time with pleasantries, and I didn't need any translation. Settling this in her language meant a final chance to put me back in the box they'd designed for me decades ago. A box with no air holes, no future, and certainly no control. I arrived at 7:55, knowing full well they'd be watching from the upstairs windows. The house was lit like a museum exhibit, every sconce and chandelier set to maximum, the kind of lighting meant to intimidate, not welcome. When I stepped inside, I half expected an attorney to greet me. Instead, I found Imogen already seated, arms draped over the arms of a leather chair, legs crossed, just so. Roxalana stood behind her like a statue in a designer dress. An Alifair hovered nearby, folding and unfolding the same silk handkerchief. Thank you for coming, Alifair said with that performative warmth she wore like pearls. This doesn't have to be unpleasant. Wouldn't want to break the family tradition, I replied. Roxolana didn't flinch. She walked toward the coffee table and laid down a folder thick enough to be preloaded with guilt. Let's make this simple, she said. You transfer control of the estate. We sign a mutual release. No more press, no more drama. Everyone walks away clean. Except me, I said. You want me to disappear? Imogen clicked her tongue. Don't dramatize it, Sophrona. We're giving you an out. No, I corrected. You're giving yourselves cover. Alifair placed the handkerchief down and smiled like a practiced nurse about to deliver bad news. We just want peace. Peace doesn't begin with erasure, I said, my voice calm, unwavering. Roxolana's eyes narrowed. This was never your role to begin with. You were tolerated, indulged even. But legacy, that takes pedigree. And loyalty, I added, the kind you all redefined every time it suited you. Imogen leaned forward, her voice icy. You're not part of this legacy. You're just a clerical error. That did it. I rose from the couch, slow and intentional. I'm not signing anything, I said. Roxolana didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Then you're no longer welcome under this roof. Was I ever? I asked, already walking toward the door. No one stopped me. Outside, the air was thick and wet. A misty drizzle had turned the sidewalk slick. I walked down the long drive with my suitcase in one hand and my dignity in the other. My name had already been removed from the gate's security system. I had to manually push it open. As I reached the street, I heard Imogen call out behind me, loud enough for everyone to hear. Make sure the door doesn't hit you on your way out. I didn't turn around. My car was parked beneath a crooked street lamp. I tossed my bag in the trunk, climbed in, and just sat. My fingers hovered over the ignition, but I didn't start the engine. The silence inside the car felt heavier than the storm outside. I opened the glove compartment, more out of muscle memory than purpose. That's when I saw it. An envelope. Thick, sealed. My name written in blocky, unmistakable handwriting. Grandpa's. On the front, if it comes to this. My throat tightened. I tore it open carefully. Inside was a key, a hand-drawn map, and a note that read, "The house that shelters your truth awaits." The address was just outside Savannah, a place I'd never heard of, tucked behind a winding two-lane road that vanished into pines. I started the car. The drive was quiet, my headlights slicing through pockets of fog. It took nearly 40 minutes, and by the time I pulled up, the rain had stopped. In front of me stood a cottage. Cedar siding, dark shutters, a wraparound porch that looked like it hadn't seen guests in years, but the lights were on. The key slid into the lock like it belonged there. Inside, the space was warm and still. The air smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. The electricity was working. The pantry was stocked. A fire had been laid in the hearth, dry kindling waiting for a match. On the mantel sat a journal, leather-bound. My name embossed in gold. I opened it. The first page read, "If you're reading this, you stood your ground. Good. Now prepare." I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I sat on the floor in front of the fire, journal in my lap, and breathed for what felt like the first time in days. Then I noticed something strange in the corner of the living room floor, a subtle mark etched into the floorboards. A compass symbol, small, deliberate. I pulled at the edge and the board lifted. Beneath it, a compartment. Inside, a folder of bank statements. A handwritten timeline, photocopies of checks written to Imogen, sums that were never returned, letters detailing requests for more money, more influence, more everything. This wasn't a retreat, it was a war room. They hadn't left me a home, they left me armor. I placed everything on the dining table, organized it into stacks, labeled each folder. I opened my laptop, created a spreadsheet, names, dates, transactions, witnesses. Then I hit record on my phone and whispered into the microphone. They wanted to scare me into silence. Now I'll let the truth do the talking. I ended the memo, saved it, then looked back down at the files in front of me. Prepare phase 2, I said aloud. No return. The first notification came just before sunrise, jolting my phone into a low, persistent buzz. Then another, and another. By the time I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and opened the screen, there were 43 messages. The group chat with 3 community board members had exploded with links, screenshots, and warnings. At the center of it all, a voice clip. I sat up slowly in bed, still wrapped in a blanket, and hit play. I never wanted the inheritance, but I'll keep it to punish them. The voice was mine, or close enough. The tone? Cold. Detached. A perfect caricature of a greedy granddaughter exacting revenge. It was paired with a thread accusing me of emotional blackmail, of being unstable, of weaponizing my grandparents' death to humiliate a family that had tried to include me. The caption read, "The truth behind Sophrona Carter's rise." I listened twice more. There was something off in the rhythm of it, a stilted flow like someone had stitched phrases together. I opened the file directory on my laptop and pulled my voice memos from the last week, my real recordings. The syntax was the same, the cadence nearly identical, but certain words in the clip had a sharper inflection. The background ambiance shifted mid-sentence. They'd spliced my own words against me. I didn't panic. I cataloged. I matched timestamps from my own files to the phrases they'd used, labeled the mismatches, then exported a comparison video. I uploaded it to a private drive, along with a scanned copy of a handwritten note from my grandmother, one I hadn't planned to share publicly. To those who mistake performance for purpose, Sophrona was never the loudest. She was the one who always returned the call. I drafted a statement, direct and emotionless. The audio circulating is edited. Here are the originals, with proof of tampering. I have no interest in public pity, only public clarity. Then I hit publish. An hour later, my inbox filled again. Some messages were apologetic. A few were hostile. Most were silent, but watching. The truth wasn't as exciting as the lie, but it was concrete. By noon, the edited clip had lost steam, but the damage lingered. I took a break and brewed coffee. The safe house kitchen was quiet. I sat at the small table near the back window, sunlight filtering through the lace curtain. On a whim, I opened the website for the Carter Family Foundation. There it was, bold, sterile, and unspoken. My name was gone. On the About Us page, beneath Founders, it read only Imogen Carter, no Margaret, no Samuel, and certainly no Sophrona. The rest of the site had been updated too. Press releases repositioned, donation pages reframed, pictures cropped. Even the mission statement had shifted, less service, more legacy. Legacy, of course, spelled with glossy photos and curated boardrooms. I picked up the phone and called Dennis, one of the few remaining board members who wasn't a cousin or a PR hire. "This isn't just an oversight," I told him. "It's a rewrite." He didn't argue. "That's not just a mistake," he said flatly. "That's intent to deceive." I sent him archived meeting notes and photos, copies of the original nonprofit registration where all 3 names, Margaret, Samuel, and mine, had been listed. He promised to forward it to the compliance committee. I composed another letter, this time for the public. Calm, clean, indisputable, no accusations, just evidence. "This isn't about credit," I wrote. "It's about truth, and the danger of stories told by those who delete what doesn't flatter them." Then I closed my browser and moved into the back room. The study had been set up as a workspace long before I arrived. My grandfather's fingerprints were everywhere, the shelves of labeled boxes, the tidy filing drawers, even the mechanical pencil that still worked. I sat down at the desk, opened both monitors, and began to build. On one screen, I cataloged every incident: audio tampering, will manipulation, financial stonewalling, media spin. On the other, I designed a digital press kit, timeline graphics, side-by-side comparisons, screenshots, legal references, no headlines, no flourishes, just facts. The narration I recorded for the video was less than 60 seconds. I've never asked to be believed, but I've always been willing to show the receipts. This is the pattern. This is the proof. Sometimes, the loudest thing you can do is show the truth and walk away. I sent the file to Izana, then to Dennis, then to a legal blogger who had built a reputation in quiet corners of the internet for unraveling estate corruption cases. I didn't expect fireworks, just exposure. I walked outside, barefoot, the grass still damp. I looked up at the trees lining the back edge of the property. For a long time, I stood there doing nothing at all. That evening, after dinner and a quiet round of journaling, I returned to the desk to check my inbox. There it was, an email from Imogen. Subject line: Careful. The body of the message contained one sentence: We warned you not to fight like this. I stared at it for a full minute, then I typed my response. No, you warned me not to fight at all. I chose not to listen. I archived the thread, dragged it into a new folder titled Evidence, Phase 2. Then I shut off the lights, closed the lid of my laptop, and whispered into the quiet. They tried to erase me from the narrative. They forgot. I still had the pen. The headline was designed to wound Heir turns family inside out. I stared at the screen, heart still but burning beneath the surface. The thread had gone viral. Dozens of screenshots, conspiracy threads, speculative edits, and right in the middle of it all, a photo. Imogen in a hospital bed, pale, fragile, tubes placed just so, a neatly folded blanket pulled to her chest, mascara smudged like the aftermath of silent tears. The accompanying statement was from her PR firm. In light of recent stress-related health concerns, Imogen Carter has been admitted for monitoring. This has been an incredibly painful time for our client and her family as they navigate betrayal and misrepresentation from within. And then Alifair, always the devoted mother when cameras rolled, gave her quote to the local paper. All we wanted was fairness. None of this should have made our daughter ill. We're a family, what's left of it. I could hear the manipulation in her voice even through print. The message was clear. I hadn't just taken the money, I'd broken their golden girl. Below that, comments flooded in. Why is Sophrona so bitter? She got millions. What else does she want? Imogen always carried herself with class. This other one, ugh. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not from sadness, not even rage, from recognition. They weren't defending themselves. They were crafting a story, one with lighting, hospital gowns, and choreographed sympathy. They don't want peace, I whispered aloud to the quiet safe house walls. They want pity to weaponize against the truth. That afternoon, I received an email invite from a local podcast. Southern Voices would love to have you on for a balanced conversation. At first, I dismissed it, but the word balanced kept looping in my mind. Maybe it was a chance to speak plainly, not as an heir or antagonist, just as someone trying to steady her own name. I replied, yes. The interview was scheduled for the next morning. And the studio was in a refurbished warehouse downtown, all reclaimed wood and matte black microphones. The host, a woman named Camille, greeted me with a practiced warmth and ushered me to my seat. We're just going to talk, she said, brushing her hair behind her ear. Nothing aggressive, just stories. I nodded, already bracing. We began with safe questions. How I felt when I learned about the inheritance. My memories of Margaret and Samuel. I spoke calmly, referencing the letters, the ledger, the quiet acts of faith my grandparents had recorded in pen when no one else was watching. Then Camille shifted. Some listeners have reached out, she began, saying they remember you as emotionally distant, difficult. One even used the term unstable. Any comment? My fingers tightened on the arm of the chair. I think, I said slowly, that when people are told for years that they're invisible, they stop performing for validation. And that silence gets labeled however it suits the speaker. Camille offered a neutral smile and nodded, but her eyes sparkled, not with agreement, but with bait laid well. I kept going, unwilling to hand her the moment. My family has always preferred appearances to accountability. That's not new. What's new is that someone finally said enough and didn't flinch. We ended the session after 28 minutes. The episode aired by nightfall. I listened once, from my laptop, alone at the dining table. The title? The Heiress Who Never Smiled. They'd chosen the frame well. The video paused on a still of me blinking mid-sentence, my mouth tight, eyes half closed. The overlaid audio pulled from moments out of order, giving my statements an edge I never intended. They'd done what they set out to do, soften me into a villain, a cold, bitter villain who just happened to inherit everything. I stared at that thumbnail. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I wrote an open letter. Titled, When Silence No Longer Protects You. I uploaded it directly to the Foundation website, where the original mission still lived beneath the PR wreckage. The letter wasn't angry, it was clear. It referenced my grandfather's own words about character over comfort. It included my documented contributions, timestamps, images, board minutes. It closed with a single paragraph. I didn't want a spotlight. But when shadows distort truth, stepping into light becomes necessary. I will not allow history to be written by those who only remember themselves. I turned off my devices, stepped outside the safe house. The night was sharp with cold. Pine trees stood tall and still, whispering nothing. I didn't know who still believed me, but I believed myself, and I knew the difference now between being visible and being loud. I closed the door behind me. They turned the public into a weapon, I whispered. Let's see what they do when the weapon sees the truth. The envelope came on thick, cream-colored stock, the kind meant to signal authority before it was even opened. It arrived by courier, not post, and bore the Carter family seal stamped in gold. Inside, a single sentence on firm letterhead, Board meeting required, clarification of rights. It was signed, of course, by Roxalana. I held the letter between my fingers and reread it under the kitchen light. The wording was legal, but the tone, that was pure threat disguised as procedure. I folded it back up and set it aside. They weren't requesting clarification, they were setting the stage to cut me out. Again. But this time, I wasn't showing up empty-handed. I arrived at the Carter Consultancy building just before 10 a.m., in a beige blouse and tailored black pants, my hair pinned back, face unreadable. I walked through the marble lobby and past portraits of men in suits, all of whom were lauded for founding legacies they'd never passed down fairly. Upstairs, the boardroom door was already open. Imogen sat at the center of the table, flanked by Roxalana and Alifair. Two board members, old friends of my grandfather's, looked wary. And to my right, seated with a neat leather briefcase, was Izana. Roxalana opened the meeting. We've reviewed the current leadership arrangement, she began, voice even, and we believe your possession of controlling shares is a technicality that no longer serves the brand's direction. I didn't interrupt. She continued. Therefore, we propose a temporary restructuring, placing decision-making power in an executive committee. Imogen slid forward a folder. It's not personal. It's just protection. For whom? I asked, my voice quiet but sharp. Alifair gave her usual syrupy smile. Some inherit titles, others inherit understanding. I reached into my bag, pulled out my own folder, and slid it down the table. Inside, certified scans of the will. Letters from my grandparents naming me as successor. Documentation of my early research contributions, which they'd always dismissed as hobby work. I didn't lecture, I didn't argue. I was overlooked, I said. I wasn't absent. The room was silent. One of the board members cleared his throat. We'll need full quorum to vote on this. Which we don't have, Izana added flatly. It was a temporary delay, a stalemate. But it was clear, this was war. I left the room without looking back. Outside, the sky was overcast, the kind of gray that made everything feel tentative. I drove straight to the Foundation Annex, a small building off Congress Street where my grandfather had often met with mentors and junior partners. I didn't go inside. Instead, I waited. 10 minutes later, Dulcie arrived. She was older now, but her presence had not faded. She still carried herself like the only adult in the room, even if her step had slowed. You said it was urgent, she greeted me, sliding into the passenger seat. They tried to remove me this morning, I said. She sighed. Samuel thought they might. She pulled out a flash drive and placed it in my palm. He recorded this 8 weeks before the accident. He asked me to hold it unless they tried to erase you. I plugged it into my laptop and watched. My grandfather sat in his home office, tie slightly loosened, a worn book open beside him. "If you're watching this," he began, "they're doing what we feared." He spoke plainly, about the company, the family, the pattern of rewriting history with a smile. "This company was built on discipline," he said, "and I trust Sophrona to lead with the same values." I didn't cry. I watched it twice. Then I sent it to every board member with a short note. This is what they feared I would find. This is what they wanted erased. There were no responses. I didn't expect any. Back at the safe house, I opened the windows and let the breeze sweep through the space. The ledger still sat on the table. The folders, now multiplied, covered most of the surface. I reached into the drawer and pulled out a pen. On a piece of cardstock, I wrote, "They tried to silence legacy with hierarchy. I'll answer them with proof." I pinned it above the desk. Then I picked up my phone and started dialing. One by one, I called legacy employees, people my grandparents had mentored, promoted, stood beside when the board had tried to sideline them for being too quiet or too honest. They remembered. They didn't ask questions. They asked how they could help. By nightfall, I had a team of 5. We met virtually, reviewed timelines, divided evidence, drafted what would become our official statement of values. We called it Restoring Carter. We didn't mention names. We just told the truth. The invitation came the same way poison does, dressed like a gift, a digital card, clean lines, soft script. In honor of Margaret and Samuel Carter, family memorial, private setting. The header carried the Carter Foundation logo, but I knew better. The sender's name was one of Imogen's new hires, the same woman who had modernized the website by erasing any mention of me. Still, I showed up. Not for them. For Margaret. For Samuel. The hall had been transformed. Branded banners, cocktail tables dressed in ivory linen, a string quartet playing Vivaldi like grief could be soundtracked. Photo collages lined the walls, black and white memories turned curated nostalgia. And in every single frame, something was missing. Me. At first, it was subtle. My arm cropped out of a group photo. A childhood picture where my face was blurred as though the film had smudged. Then I saw it. A photo that used to hang in my grandparents' kitchen. Thanksgiving, 10 years ago. I was seated between them, holding my grandmother's hand. But now, the image on the wall showed only Imogen, perfectly lit. The rest of us vanished. "They erased me from the pictures," I muttered under my breath. A waiter passed by. I didn't move. I just stared at that wall, at the glossy lies taped over decades of truth. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a sealed envelope, handwritten across the front. To be opened only when they pretend too hard. My grandmother's script. I walked to the donation table, placed the envelope gently beside the flower arrangement, and turned to leave. "Sophrona?" a voice called. I stopped. It was Mrs. Whitaker, an old friend of the family. Silver hair pinned back, pearls still in style. "That letter, was that from Margaret?" "Yes," I said simply. She frowned. "Then it ought to be read." I didn't respond, but she did. Mrs. Whitaker rang the silver bell at the center of the room. Conversations halted. The quartet faded into silence. "Excuse me," she said, voice carrying, clear as crystal. "This letter, written by Margaret Carter, was placed here by her granddaughter. I believe it was meant to be shared." Someone handed her a letter opener. Gasps filled the room before she finished the second paragraph. "If you're reading this," Margaret had written, "you've turned a memorial into a marketing stunt. Our legacy was never meant for display, but for impact. Sophrona embodies that. Let no one else claim our name with hollow words." Silence. Imogen stood. "That's not—" I turned and walked out. I didn't need to stay. The truth had already spoken. The next morning, I was sipping coffee on the porch of the safe house when the phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in years. "Beatrix," I greeted without warmth. "You humiliated the family," she snapped. "You forged that letter, didn't you?" I didn't answer. She pressed on. "You think just because they gave you some money you can rewrite history? Let me tell you something, girl. You were never one of us. Your parents adopted you into a name you didn't earn." I stayed quiet, hit record, and let her talk. When she hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I simply found an old photo from Christmas 1996. Me sitting between Margaret and Samuel by the fireplace, our hands entwined. I mailed it to Beatrix in a simple wooden frame. No note, just one line etched at the bottom. Funny, they framed me every year, until now. That afternoon, I logged into the Foundation's original server, the one they'd tried to bury beneath PR makeovers and boardroom strategies. I uploaded a public note. The title was simple, Clear Truth. The note read, "I didn't speak to be seen. I spoke because they tried to silence the truth one photo at a time. I don't need filters or features to remember who I am. I need facts. And they're here, whether anyone likes them or not." I closed all my public accounts, deleted every app. Their version of legacy needed attention to survive. Mine needed none of it. If their legacy needed a lie to survive, I wrote in my journal that evening, then it wasn't a legacy worth keeping. The courthouse was colder than I remembered. Gray walls, overwaxed floors, a chill in the air that had nothing to do with air conditioning. I walked in just before 9 a.m., file folder in hand, my heels striking the marble like punctuation. I wasn't here to plead. I was here to submit. Across town, in a private event hall lit for cameras, my family was staging a reconciliation brunch. It had been announced in local papers as a celebration of legacy and unity. Imogen, Roxolana, and Alifair were all expected to speak about healing, about family, about how grief had temporarily complicated things. I didn't send a camera crew to the courthouse, just a courier. He walked into their brunch like a ghost in a tailored suit, carrying subpoenas with embossed seals. One for Imogen, one for Roxolana, one for Alifair. They were served mid-speech. And from what I was told later, the footage captured everything. Roxolana's voice trembled mid-sentence. Imogen froze, eyes wide, lips parted like a debutante caught mid-rehearsal. Alifair, always the actress, crumbled, tears streaking down makeup as she clutched her pearls and whispered, "Why would she do this?" I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. My silence had become their reckoning. The lawsuit, filed that morning, laid out everything. Fraud, defamation, attempted forgery, emotional coercion, and will tampering. Attached were timeline documents, audio transcripts, video comparisons, and copies of doctored interviews. My legal team, quiet but fierce, had compiled it with the precision of surgeons and the patience of saints. We didn't ask for damages. We asked for accountability. By noon, the Foundation's website had crashed. My open letter, originally uploaded a week ago, was now circulating like wildfire, picked up by an ethics podcast, reshared by estate reform advocates, and dissected line by commentators who'd once questioned my silence. They weren't questioning anymore. She never clapped back. She built a case. Imagine being erased from your family and still moving with grace. The internet, brutal as ever, had shifted. They began comparing Imogen's PR footage, hospital bed and mascara tears, with raw clips from her brunch. Side-by-side videos showing rehearsed expressions, inconsistencies in her story. A hashtag trended for 3 days. Hashtag Truth Outlasts. Spin. And the messages came. Thousands of them. Women, mostly. People who'd been left out of wills, cut out of family photos, rewritten in narratives they never agreed to star in. They wrote to me not as a headline, but as a survivor, and I read every word. That week, the Carter Foundation board met behind closed doors. 2 members stepped down. An internal audit was launched. Their longtime financial attorney dropped representation. A statement was issued. The foundation distances itself from the personal actions of certain trustees. We remain committed to ethical practice. Local media picked it up within hours. Carter Harris was right. Legal battle uncovers altered records. I didn't hold a press conference. I didn't throw a victory party. Instead, I transferred the remaining balance of my legal contingency fund, every cent that hadn't been spent on discovery, into 3 local educational programs. Scholarships, books, programs for girls who wanted to lead, not just be seen. That night, I sat by the fireplace in the safe house, the glow of flames casting long shadows. I opened my journal and wrote, "Sometimes the win isn't the judgment, it's the echo." And then, something unexpected. Tucked inside one of the folders from months ago, I found a draft email. Subject: Still trying. It was addressed to my grandfather, dated nearly a year before his death. I must have written it, then saved it, then forgotten. I opened it. "I don't know if you see me clearly. I don't know if you ever did. But I'm trying. I'm not like them. I don't move loudly. I don't network in rooms full of people I don't trust. But I remember things. I finish things. I keep promises. I just wish I knew if that was enough for you." I stared at it for a long time. Then I whispered the only response that mattered. "Thank you for not saving me. Thank you for preparing me." I didn't send it. I printed it, folded it once, slid it into the back of his old leather journal. Then I turned off the light and went to bed, the world still roaring online. Their downfall wasn't my intention, but the truth never asked for permission. The emails came in minutes apart. The first was from Alifair, short, sharp, and padded in her usual performance of civility. "I hope you understand the damage done," she wrote, as if I were the earthquake and not the tectonic plate they'd spent years cracking beneath me. "The family is struggling to recover. We would have handled this differently had we known how far you'd go." The second, from Roxalana, was colder. "You've made choices that cannot be undone. Some fractures in legacy do not mend. This, for many of us, was the end of the line." Neither message deserved a response. I clicked delete without reading them again. What surprised me most wasn't the absence of apology. It was that I no longer needed one. I didn't ache for explanation. I didn't long for mended ties. Somewhere along the line, acceptance had replaced that hunger. Maybe that was what peace actually looked like. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just the quiet, unshakable decision to stop expecting more from people who had never known how to give it. I opened my journal and wrote, "Not every silence is surrender. Sometimes it's just the end of caring." My mind wandered to memories of childhood Thanksgivings, of watching Imogen light up a room while I stood in corners trying to be helpful, unnoticed. I used to dream of a moment when the whole family would look at me and see someone worth keeping. That moment never came, and I stopped asking for it. Later that week, I walked into the Carter Foundation headquarters for the first time since the subpoenas were served. The building was the same, but the air had changed. Staff greeted me with hesitant nods, some warm, others guarded. I handed over a thick folder of compliance documents to the new director, a woman named Joan who had worked under my grandfather for 2 decades. "Thank you for coming in personally," she said. "We've been cleaning house, carefully." I smiled faintly. "I'm not here for oversight, just stewardship." She led me to the boardroom. The long table still bore the scars of time, coffee rings, dents, ink blotches, familiar ghosts. We reviewed the updates. The foundation's new leadership would be composed of former colleagues of my grandparents, people who had once been silenced by hierarchy. Now, they had a voice. "We've reinstated the original service programs," Joan said. "Your grandparents' initiatives for education and community outreach, they're coming back. Quietly." "Good," I said. "That's all I wanted." As I exited the meeting, my eyes landed on the front desk. The brass nameplate that once read Imogen Carter, Executive Director, was gone. No replacement had been installed yet, just a bare space on the polished wood. There was no applause, no dramatic removal, just absence. I didn't smile. Closure doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it just looks like no longer needing to be seen. That evening, Honora showed up at the safe house carrying a pie and an old photo album. "I wasn't sure if you'd be home," she said. "I always make room for you." We sat at the kitchen table, flipping through pictures that had never made it to the foundation's curated collages, ones where I was front and center, covered in flour next to Grandma, ones where Grandpa let me fall asleep on his shoulder after too much sun. They never knew how to love without asking for control, Honora said softly, her eyes on a picture of me as a child, holding a book bigger than my torso. They called it order, I replied, but it was always performance. You were always the only one who saw the difference. I squeezed her hand. Thank you for staying when everything else turned into theater. We shared the pie in silence, the weight between us finally lifting. After she left, I opened my phone and blocked Imogen on every platform, not out of pettiness, not out of spite, but because I no longer needed access to people who only remembered me when I fit their scripts. That night, I sat by the fire and wrote one last letter. It was addressed to them. I didn't plan to send it, but I needed to write it. You don't get to speak first anymore. You don't get to define what my silence meant. You gave me a legacy of omission. I turned it into a language only the free understand. When I finished, I folded the paper once, walked to the fireplace, and dropped it in. The flame caught instantly. I stood there, arms crossed, watching the ink bleed into orange until nothing remained. Some things don't deserve to be saved. Some things need to be burned to make space for air. The foundation hall was quiet, save for the faint rustle of papers and the low hum of overhead lights. No red carpets, no flashbulbs, no podiums with gold-embossed logos, just rows of folding chairs and a projector screen pulled taut against the front wall. The backdrop bore no family crest, just the simple words, Carter, Margaret Samuel, Community First. I stood off to the side as guests filtered in. Lawyers, local press, a handful of community leaders, and former staffers who hadn't stepped foot in the building since my grandparents passed. I hadn't invited anyone with a title, just people with a conscience. I wore dark navy, no jewelry except my grandmother's watch. The press had called it a media ambush. I called it a reckoning. When it was time, I stepped to the center of the room and clicked on the projector. No theatrics, just facts. This presentation outlines financial irregularities, forged documentation, and actions taken under false pretenses by former trustees of this foundation. The goal is not retaliation. The goal is transparency. Slide after slide told the story. Loan distributions with no paper trail. Press statements tied to donor solicitation events that contradicted tax disclosures. PR contracts awarded to Imogen's private firm without board approval. Then came the final piece. A video. My grandfather, in his home office, steady voice and tired eyes. If you're watching this, they've done what we feared. Let this serve as a record of truth. The legacy of this foundation belongs to those who build, not those who brand. The room was silent. I walked to the center, lifted a folder, and opened the final document. This is a notarized letter and time-stamped record showing that Roxalana Carter and Imogen Carter submitted an older will to a probate clerk in an attempt to delay execution of the valid estate plan. Gasps. One reporter whispered to another. She didn't just fight back, she built a case like a fortress. I let that hang in the air before closing the folder. I won't be pressing criminal charges today. There were stirs, murmurs, but I continued. Instead, I'm placing all Carter estate shares into a trust for legal and ethics education. This was never about control. It was about honoring what mattered to them, what they lived, and how they wanted it to live on. I looked at the DA's representative seated in the second row. I trust the right authorities to investigate what comes next. I don't need to watch the fall. I just need to walk forward. The room broke into quiet clapping, not performative, just acknowledgement. Later that day, local outlets carried the story. One headline read, "From disowned to defined, Sophrona Carter rewrites the record." At the safe house, I kicked off my shoes and walked barefoot into the backyard. The sun had dropped just enough to stretch the shadows of the trees long across the grass. I crouched beside the small bed I'd planted weeks ago, brushing fingers along the petals of the lilies my grandmother once loved. They were blooming. Back inside, I picked up Margaret's final journal and flipped to the last few pages. Her writing was softer in tone, shorter entries, reflections. We chose her because she never asked to be chosen. She simply chose us. I closed the book, pressed it to my chest for a moment, and set it back on the shelf. A knock at the door. Honora. She stepped inside with a wooden picture frame wrapped in brown paper. "I thought this one belonged here," she said. I opened it. A family photo, one I hadn't seen in years. No edits, no crops. Me in the center, arms around both of them, smile unguarded. "I found it tucked behind one of the old cookbooks," she added. "It was always there, just hidden." I set the frame on the mantel and finally, smiled. Not with victory, with release. Later, I sat in the office and recorded a message for the Foundation's homepage. Just me, a quiet room, a single camera. This place isn't built on the pain we survived, but on what we built despite it. I turned off the recording, took my coffee out to the porch. They wrote me out of the story, so I wrote a better one.